This is Crew Tales, Life in the Circus. In the motion picture world, there are an army of dedicated professionals who work behind the scenes to make the movies and shows we watch today. I'm Brad Hodson, and I've spent over 30 years in the motion picture industry. This podcast celebrates the people who make the magic behind the scenes. Mike Sankey, welcome to the circus.
Thank you very much.
Describe what you do.
I work as a digital imaging technician, which is a very lofty title for watching a lot of footage going by on a monitor. I track cameras, I track the settings of the cameras, I track all the data that the cameras are producing. I liaise with post-production, both for dailies timing as well as for editorial. I do my very best to make sure that the director's and director of photography's vision is realized in the camera settings and the setup that we're shooting with. I basically take over what used to be the first few steps of film post-production, where the lab would produce dailies and they would be looking for focus, they would be looking for framing, they would be making sure that everything was correct. It's sort of like a first level of insurance.
So color timing is a lot of what you do to make sure that the image comes out the other end.
Very much so. It's color timing for dailies is what it's become. So the vision that the director of photography has on set may or may not be realized in post, especially in television where I've worked principally. The director of photography doesn't always get to sit through the whole post process and attend timing sessions as much as they'd like. So we are able to present to our editorial department the realized vision of a final product on the day with changes and adjustments to color and contrast as we're shooting, as well as both the technical aspect in that we need to make sure that what we're printing is in film terms, a good thick negative so that they have flexibility in post-production.
And this is a fairly new position to the industry since the transition from film to video, right, Mike?
The position did not exist in film. It was, there would be no comparable position for film because we couldn't affect the color or production or viewing on set. You were stuck with a video tap and maybe you would maybe adjust the monitors for the video tap, but it was not a representation of what the film was actually capturing. We're able to view on set pretty much what is going to be in the final product. And we're trying to approximate what post-production is capable of doing, which is much, much more detailed and much more finely tuned than what we're able to do on set.
Right. Tell us how you got to this position in your career thus far.
Directly, I worked for a broadcast video rentals company for several years as their in-house technician and engineer. Production company called a rentals company called Sim Video. They were recently bought up by Keslow, but they were one of the larger film rental companies in town. Prior to that, they were Canada's largest broadcast rental facility. And I worked there for many years, working with NTSC cameras, what would be considered news cameras or ENG cameras. Those cameras evolved from analog machines to digital machines to high-resolution digital machines. And once we got to what we call HD now, or standard HD, the idea to use those for dramatic productions came in as a cheaper alternative to film. And when they started doing that, they realized they needed people that were capable of doing on-set engineering, what was always considered the domain of technical directors and color timers on set. And so the position of digital imaging technician was created. It wasn't called that initially. It didn't really have a name. It was HD engineer or HD technician. I've had a few different titles before that. Eventually, they settled on the title digital imaging technician to avoid the title engineer, to put us into a different American union category. And I've been doing it ever since. That was about 20 years ago that we started doing this early transition. My first work was actually through Sim Video. We rented the cameras to a couple of film productions, and I found myself on set for hours and hours every day, going through all the issues that you needed to with paint boxes and color timing. And eventually, the rental houses just said, "We're not lending you our engineer. You're going to have to hire your own." And so the union created the position, and I was offered the job because I had been doing it through my day job. And I made the transition, jumped onto series and never looked back.
So you're there right from the ground up, from the transition from film to digital. Can you describe a little bit on the advantages to being digital as opposed to film? Because for decades, filmmaking was just that, filmmaking. Uh, the negatives and film cameras.
Hmm.
Now, very few films are shot today on film, although some are coming back.
Yeah.
Describe some of the pros and cons of going to digital from film.
If I go back to the beginning when we first started, they were almost all cons. There was really no advantage. The hardest part for film crews to adapt was they were used to a capacity that film had for capturing light, which was huge. It was very forgiving. It was very beautiful. It had been developed for 100 years. And here you had this new technology that was principally used for broadcast television, for sports or news. And they were trying to sort of jam a giant concept of art into a very, very small package in terms of latitude of what the film was capable of capturing relative to what the original high definition cameras were capable of capturing. It was a negative for pretty much every technician that was working on set. There was strong resistance to it, but the cost savings were phenomenal. There used to be a lot more losses on film. Like there would be mags that were flashed, like accidentally exposed during the process. Sometimes they would be damaged. Sometimes there would be scratches. And that rarely happened with digital tape formats. They were pretty reliable relative to film. When we finally converted to non-tape based capture and actually converted to hard disk capture or drive captures, we almost never lose footage. It's usually human error that causes loss of footage at this point. The systems itself are actually very reliable. So that was really the initial advantage. It was cost. It was just a cheaper way to produce. Film was expensive. Developing it was expensive. It was a time period of delay for production. But it lent to new creativity. And I was fortunate enough to work with a gentleman named Stephen McNutt, who was very experienced with both video and film and had worked on many, many TV series prior to meeting me. And he was creative enough to look at the limitations of the digital system and create a look for shows. So we began a very creative process where we would actually be tied to the cameras and be really doing a very, very large portion of the color timing on set and doing it live. And it was a very creative process. So we could say that we wanted something to look a certain way and we would commit to that. And we had the blessings of the producers who were very forgiving of the new technology and really encouraged its development. And I think it was people like that allowed us to make what was a very disliked product an actually very liked product. So the creative energy that we could have using a digital format on set was something new. That was the big advantage that nobody realized at the time, was we actually got to see what the show was going to look like before it went to the lab. So you didn't get to see it till the next day. You didn't get to see if things were in focus or if you captured the edges or tricks. And we could see that on the day. And once you could do that, we could make the commitment to say, we want it to look this way, or we want to have this feel. And I was very fortunate to be along for the ride on those early days, which is very different from how we do things now.
Well, I'm sure. On that note, describe a little bit about the capture. I know you're saying 20 years ago when digital was first transitioning over, capturing devices, cards, and that kind of thing have come a long way in 20 years. Go through a little bit of how that went for you.
In the brief chronology, the original formats were a digital tape format, and the tape was contained within the machine, so it was an ENG camera. And so we would record a digital format, digital tape, and so we would send the tapes off to the lab, and they would have to import them into their systems for editorial.
That's a lot of data.
That's a lot of data and tape, and it was a lot of tape, and it was an inefficient system. It was real time. The tapes were more fragile, and occasionally we would have errors. That was when we were still in the lossy stage. We would actually lose footage due to bad tapes or clogged heads. And again, these were not production cameras. These were not cameras that were friendly to dramatic film production. They were friendly for news gathering. They were friendly for sports, for freelance. They were meant to have zooms that one person operated. So there was a lot of adaptation at that time. The next generations of cameras captured on digital format within the magazines. We call them mags. A digital mag would capture it, just a little hard drive. And that was sort of the big transition. That also led to a revolution which made digital acceptable, was the capturing not in a linear format, and I won't go into the big technical aspects, but we figured they decided that the best way to capture the image, which allowed the most latitude of stops from light to dark, was in a digital format in a logarithmic capturing. We call it log. And that doesn't look very good. It's very flat, but it's very forgiving, and it allows a lot of flexibility in post. And that created a new world where we had to download the footage, and we also had to correct it on set to make it look like it was going to in post. And that's where my job took a leap, and some of the technologies in control and systems to view took a leap forward. And that was a complete transition from the old style television paint boxes, color correction. I would have a little module that would be attached to the camera and would do all the color corrections live to tape, and they would be committed and permanent and permanent in the sense that we couldn't undo them. If we blew something out or crushed it into darkness, it was just not there. Whereas now in the logarithmic form, I create what's called a CDL, a color decision list. And that, using a D-log format, which is, again, large technical explanation, basically brings the image back to life. We can do all these corrections and they're not permanent. So when we switched to logarithmic recording, we were making changes and decisions on the color that were on top of. They were separate from the actual captured media. So the captured media could remain stable and flexible, and we could present an image on set that would be produced or reproduced later on in post. So if you can imagine, we capture a film negative, but we are able to give a good approximation of what that final product will look like through some color correction. And it's non-permanent. We can change it. The commitment to, say, an extreme image or an extreme color correction was just that. It was non-permanent. It was impermanent. It was not baked in, they like to say.
Right. So there's a lot of latitude with digital compared to film.
Huge
right?
amount of latitude compared to film. Yeah, and that was the big transition in the digital era. So we went from a digital era that captured on tape in a linear format that was permanent. We color corrected on site, and that was the way it was. And that was almost the first 10 years of digital filming. Since then, we have changed that over with a much greater latitude. The cameras have been developed for this purpose, not for live presentation, but for later presentation. And that was a revolution. That was a revolution within our industry, where the title of my job was created, the digital imaging technician.
Right. And now I assume you're recording on cards, right? It's not hard drives anymore.
The hard drive is a bit of a funny one. Yeah, it's all on a little digital stick, just like everybody uses at home. They're larger and safer and better produced, but they really are just digital cards.
Large capacity,
It's the same hard drives that everybody uses. They're just very, very stable industrial versions of the same things.
SSD cards,
yeah. Yeah.
What are some of the perks and some of the cons of your job?
For me personally, or do you mean like for me and my job? I think I have the best job on set. I have, I get to work with some of the most creative people. I don't have to lift and carry anything other than my own equipment. I have more people assisting me than I assist other people, because my job is very much sitting and watching what's happening. So pretty much once the cameras are turned on, I have to pay very close attention and be in direct communication with the director of photography and the camera crew to make sure that what we're doing is safely captured and safely shot. So I like to think of my job as being a consultant. I am literally there to just say, is everything good? And if everybody's doing everything properly, we don't have to have a long discussion on set. We prepare everything in the pre-production point. We decide what formats we're shooting, what cameras we're going to work with. We decide what the final post-production process is, because there is a whole series of things that happen long after we shoot that we have to prepare for and make sure are happening in a timely manner and an efficient manner. And that's not something that a camera crew has time to deal with on set. And it is something that I have time to deal with. I can communicate with post. I can communicate about dailies. I can go in and watch timings. I can look at all of the footage as we're going along, and make sure that what the DP, the director of photography, wants done is done in post, which is not always the easiest thing in television. It's a very busy process.
So being a person in the industry, in the motion picture industry, how do you watch movies?
Wait, hold on. I didn't answer your question. I went off on a tangent and
Oh.
I did not answer your question. Ask me that question again.
What was the question again?
What are the perks of my job?
Oh,
And I started talking about how directly it was very, sorry guys. Sorry. The rambling on what are the perks of my job?
And then also, so I also asked some of the pros and cons.
Perks and pros and cons. Okay, let me actually answer your question. To answer your question directly, perks and pros and cons of my job. I get to work with some amazing creative people. I'm surrounded by some of the most talented, most dedicated professionals in any type of field that you could ever hope for. And in this case, we're creating really what I think is some of the greatest modern art in entertainment field. We have brilliant cinematographers. We have dedicated camera assistants. We have phenomenally skilled camera operators. And I just get to sit there and watch what they do all day. That is a huge perk of my job. I don't do any of their jobs, but I'm fortunate to be around those people every day and to have them lean on me for things that I can assist them with. So that is, to me, is the biggest perk. That and the snacks. A lot of snacks.
Snacks. Any cons?
Yeah.
Too many snacks.
Too many snacks. Yeah. I've described my job to people as I sit in a little black tent all day and watch TV and eat snacks. And that's great in the winter when it's cold and wet and you get to sit in a dry tent. It is horrible in the summer. We've entered into the summer months again. And when it hits 30 degrees outside in the direct sunlight, it's at least 10 degrees hotter inside that tent. So a lot of my time is spent trying not to melt.
If that's the worst of it, that's so bad.
It's not so bad. Best job on set.
As someone who works in the motion picture industry, how do you watch movies? I'm not like sitting with snacks.
Yeah, not to describe the actual reclining position.
Yeah.
How do I watch them?
How do you see movies?
Very differently. I often watch films that require me to watch repeatedly. I'm more interested in shows that have great depth to them. When I watch a film like Tenet, it was not filmed to be watched once. You just simply can't get all the details when you watch it once. I really enjoy films that I have to watch over and over again. And that's really how I see my job, because I watch a show being produced over and over again. 10 takes of one part of one setup. We shoot scenes sometimes that require 15 or more setups to get a piece of a show. And I will watch it over and over and over again. And I find that I watch films that way. I watch it over and over again, hoping to catch the details, hoping to catch the hidden, deeper message that somebody's trying to display in their art form. In television, there's less of that. It's more meant to be viewed once and go by. But when I watch movies and films, yeah, I like shows that I can watch over and over again and find details that I missed the first 10 times I watched them.
Yep. What I enjoy about being in the industry too is you can sit back at home and watch movies or television, and you're kind of learning your craft. Mm-hmm. You've worked with the people, or you might work with the people who did those shows, and that's just by osmosis watching movies. So it's kind of nice to have that.
Absolutely.
What are some of your favorite movies, Mike?
Well, I mentioned Tenet. That is one of my, in the modern sense of my favorites. Memento was a movie that I latched onto years ago. It was actually, I watched it first when I was first starting in film, working full time on set. And it was an experience to see a show that I didn't understand. I really enjoyed it, but I really didn't understand the show. Movies like Snatch that really try and push the boundaries of what a show is, and different types of narratives, parallel narratives, multiple storylines at the same time. When you're working on a show, you only get to see one piece of it. And I really enjoy watching shows that you can't view once. You have to see them as an edited, finished product. So in a sort of a narrative style where you have parallel lines, I find those fascinating because we don't get to see the parallel lines while we're shooting. We shoot them one day, we shoot them another day. I worked years ago on a show and we shot half of an episode on one location because it was meant to be a flashback episode. And then we shot the other half months later. And we didn't know what it was going to look like when we shot the first scenes. We had no idea. We'd read the script, but even they hadn't decided how the pieces were going to be used. And when I saw the finished product, it was not what we'd filmed. It became something very different. And that is a very enjoyable part of the process, is to enjoy the actual capture and creation, but then to see what others do with that footage afterwards is really fascinating.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that same thing too. You read a script and you think, oh, I could see it in one way.
Mhm.
And then when you find what you've worked on, having read the script, and you go, that's completely different than what I imagined it. What are some of the more interesting projects? What are some of your favorite projects you've worked on that are particularly stand out in your career?
I'd have to say Battlestar Galactica was really my high water mark, I think, for creativity.
Not the original. You're not old enough
Not
for
the
that.
original.
Yeah.
I'm not that old. 78. I was a little kid. I did not watch the original one from the.
I watched all of those too.
Yeah.
Those are cutting edge in those days.
Yeah, those were very different for me. Those were when I still played with the toys that were sold alongside them. No, the reboot of the TV series. That was an early on show for me. That was actually the third show that I worked on full time as a camera engineer, as a digital imaging technician. And that was where I really got to see how creative my job was. I was thrown into it from a technical standpoint in that I knew how the systems operated. I understood what my color correctors were capable of, but I had the privilege of sitting next to Stephen McNutt, who was given a mandate of making something extreme and making something different and making something special. And it was and still is a high watermark for me. The combination of amazing showrunners, of fabulous technicians, of wonderful actors, of brilliant scripts. It was something unique. And I remember asking the very experienced camera operators that we worked with if they had ever experienced anything like this. And they said, no, this was something special. And so even though it was new for me, I was new in my job, I knew I was part of something that would be different and hard to ever repeat.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
What are some other interests you do outside of the film industry? Stay sane, stay busy.
Stay busy outside of work. I play guitar. My first love was always music. I originally did not plan to work in film. I had planned to work in the music industry somewhere. I realized early on that I wasn't a good enough guitar player to make a living at it. And the idea of touring with a bunch of people in a car to bars was never appealing. So I wanted to be a recording engineer. And so my first love and interest, and in fact, my understanding of all technical things, is how I reference them all back to audio. I go to a lot of concerts. I play a lot of guitar. I listen to a lot of music. It's where I originally started. It's kind of where my heart still lives. So yeah, my interest outside of film or music.
Oh, wonderful. Any advice or thoughts to people who want to get into the industry, and maybe specifically if, I want to be a dit, but more so the industry, right?
The industry itself, I think it's awareness of what it entails and how much of a commitment it is. I think when you're 20 years old, starting out in a job, working 60 hours a week doesn't seem unreasonable. But you don't think in terms of the consistency that might be necessary for, say, raising children or owning a home or having a stable financial setup. And I also work with our union a bit, and we have a camera trainee program. And I talk to the new camera technicians as they come in a lot, not about what their job entails. I let other people teach them that. But I do like to offer the advice of 20 years experience of what they should be doing outside of just the technical skills. And one of them is having an exit strategy. I don't look around on set and see a lot of people that are 60 years old carrying sandbags. It's a job for the young. And if you think you're going to do it till you're 65, you really need to be in a different position, and you need to be very well-rounded and very prepared. I just tell everybody when they start working, save at least 3 months, minimum 3 months, preferably 6 months, because that's how long the gaps are between jobs a lot of the time. And that's something that people don't understand. They're not prepared for.
Right. As it's called, the circus, I liken us to carnies in a way. We pull up stakes after one project and move on to the next.
Yeah.
Mike Sankey, thank you so much. Appreciate you being on the Circus today.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Brad.
Well, that about wraps it up for another episode of Crew Tales, Life in the Circus. I'd like to thank our producers Dustin Schwinnard and Dustin Girton, as well as our technical producer Rob Hunt. I'm Brad Hodson. Thank you for joining us.